What is up, everyone? This is Jake, and today's video is going to be the first video in a series of videos I'm going to be making. I said video a lot there. Wow. Anyways, like I said, this will be the first video in a series of videos about how to make a comic book, and more specifically, how I make comic books. I'm not a professional comic book artist or anything. I just have a huge passion for making comic books and just sequential art in general. I've had several people ask me how I make comic books, so I figured I would share with you how I do it. So I don't waste any more of your time, let's go ahead and get started. But before we do, be sure to like and subscribe, and drop me a comment below. Let me know if you thought this video was helpful, or if you have any suggestions on how I could have made it more helpful. I always appreciate feedback, and well, the best place to get it is from you guys. Also, if you're interested in picking up my comic book, the first 2 issues are available on Etsy. It's called Settersome, and obviously it's from Doomsayer Designs. Well, technically the publishing company is Doomsayer Comics, and by publishing company I mean me printing it out and, stapling it together. But whatever, it still counts. They're $5 each plus shipping, and let me tell you what, $5 for this is dirt cheap, because I put a lot of hours into this comic book. If you don't believe me, ask this guy. See? I mean, I can't be wrong. It's a 4-issue horror story about a weird town called Settersome, which is essentially an alternate reality of the town I live in. So if you like things like The Twilight Zone or old school horror or H.P. Lovecraft, you might be interested in this. But I'll quit shamelessly plugging my products and we'll get started. So I have how I create a comic book broken down into 9 steps total. Really, it's 8 steps, but the first step is step 0, so it's 0 through 8. And the reason that's step 0 is because the first step, or the 0 step, is an idea. Which, if you're watching this video, I assume you already have an idea for a comic book, and if that's not the case, then start at step 0, come up with an idea for the comic book you want, and then head to step 1. That's where the real action starts. So the first thing I do after I have an idea for a comic book to create my comic book is to thumbnail everything out. And how I like to thumbnail things is I take a larger sketchbook. For example, this one right here is an 11 by 14 sketchbook. So the first thing you need to do when making your thumbnails is to determine how many comic book pages you're going to have. Also, the number of pages you have in your book needs to be divisible by 4. That's because you're printing pages on the front and the back of each piece of paper. So 2 on each side means 4 total pages. So for my second issue of Settersome, I did 20 pages. So when I start making my thumbnails, I just do a small sketch of about 1.5 inches to 2 inches tall by 1.5 inches or so. And the reason I do this is you want to simulate the size of the 11.5 by 17 paper that I use. And the reason I use that size of paper because, first of all, it's an industry standard. Almost every American comic book artist uses an 11 by 17 piece of paper. But also, if you shrink that down exactly 50%, it is exactly 1/2 of a page. Well, in a landscape proportion, it's exactly 1/2 of a page of copier paper, because 8.5 by 5.5 is exactly 1/2 of a page of copier paper. So it's actually the cheapest way to do it. That's really why I started doing it, because it's so much cheaper just to print this on copier paper. If you want to get your comic printed and price point's an issue for you, then this is definitely the way to go. I personally just love DIY, just kind of print it off, staple it together. I like the homemade feel of it. I've always kind of liked the punk rock, zine, I always love stuff like that. So this is kind of why I went this way. So once you have your page laid out here, what you want to do is compose the page. So for example, the first page of Settersome issue 2 is a splash page, which means the entire page is covered with art. And the splash page is also an establishing shot of an apartment building. So the original thumbnail I had was something like this, just a standard building, just so I know what's going on. I drew some windows in it, things like that, but it actually turned out a little different as I started drawing it, which is fine. Your thumbnails is just going to be really the composition of the page more than it is the details. It's going to show you how you need to lay your page out and how it needs to line up. So originally I had just kind of a building right here, but then it changed to where in the foreground I actually had the top of another building, and then I had a pipe coming out here with some smoke and stuff like that. A bunch of little details. I drew more buildings here going out of perspective and things like that, just to add a little detail to it. But in my original thumbnail, as you can see, it's just a building. This is the actual page for thumbnails I use for my issue 2 of my comic. So as you can see, it's just the building with a street corner, and as I started drawing it, I thought that was kind of boring, so I ended up changing it to this. So you can see I still have the building here like I wanted, but I put another building in the foreground here with a pipe and some smoke going on, with a kind of a starry sky, a little shadow here in the window. Put a little bit more dynamic perspective on it. I threw a billboard here. Thumbnails are just a guideline for you to start out, really. That's all they are. It's just to show you how you're going to lay your page out. So once I have the pencil sketch of my thumbnail down, I go ahead and I just ink very lightly over it, just so you can kind of see what exactly is going to go on with it. It doesn't really have to be much. It can be super sloppy. Like I said, you're just laying out the details of the page. You don't really have to have a ton of detail. It's just composition. You want to see how your piece is going to be composed, and this is really just to give you an idea of that. So once I have that down, that's really all I do. I go on to the next page. So for me, the best thing to do is to get all the thumbnails laid out, then I write the story. Now, I have an idea for the story before I go into the comic book. Like I said, that's step 0. You gotta have your idea. But once I have that idea laid out, I do my thumbnails. Because for me, it's much harder to write out the script and then draw everything to it. I'm much more of a visual person, so I draw all the thumbnails out first, and once I have the thumbnails laid out, I'll draw all the pages, and once I draw all the pages, I'll go and add the dialogue. The story actually gets written almost last, but the idea for the story is there from the inception. And you may think this sounds crazy, but I mean, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did this all the time. Jack Kirby drew a lot of comics before Stan Lee ever saw them. I mean, they may have had like a vague idea of the story, or Stan Lee might have, but then once he got those pages, he filled in all the bubbles of what they were saying, what they were doing, and stuff like that. So he kind of had an idea, but then he just filled in what he thought should go there, which is kind of how I do it. I like to draw out the stories. I like the art to really tell the story more so, or as much I should say, as the dialogue itself. And the reason I sketch up my thumbnails like this is because sometimes as I'm writing the story or as I'm laying out the pages, the story tends to change. It gets a little different from time to time. So what I'll do is I'll actually cut these out and tape them to another page. As you can see, these are actually taped down to the page here because I've rearranged the story a few different times. There's pages I didn't like, so I took them off and I redrew them. So what I suggest doing is drawing your individual pages out. If you need to redraw something or you want to change something, just draw a new page and then throw it down here, and if you need to change it, you can change it out. That's how I suggest doing your thumbnails, or at least that's how I do the thumbnails because it's easier for me that way. I like to thumbnail everything out, then write the story after I draw the pages. There is no correct way to create art, but there's a few important things you need to learn while laying your pages out. Okay, 2 very important things you should remember. So, first of all, the middle page in the very middle of the book should be your 2-page spread. So, for example, this comic book is 20 pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Well, where you have a 20-page comic book, page 10 and page 11 are going to be your 2-page spread. That way it prints directly on one side of a sheet of paper. You won't have that crease line in it, it just looks better. Also like an industry standard. But then again, this is art and it's subjective, so create it how you want to. But this is just how I do comics. So my 2-page spread always goes on the middle page. And as you can see, having the splash page printed on the back of one page is the way to go, because it has this entire piece of art, which is cool, man. I love the way this looks. So it's one giant 2-page spread right in front of you, right in the middle of the book. There's no seam there. I think it looks awesome. So that's your first rule, put your 2-page spread on your middle page. Second rule I always use is if you're gonna have like a good surprise or something, a good bit of action that's gonna come out in a page, you wanna have that on the even page. And the reason is you always have to turn to the even page. So it's like the surprise page that comes over. So for a good example of what I mean by you wanna have your surprise pages on your even pages, we're gonna go to the first issue of my comic, Sederson. I'm not really gonna go into details of the comic in case you wanna read it, but you can see he's walking down this alleyway and he starts to feel these tentacles come around him and he's like, what the hell? Oh no, my dreams, it can't be. And then you turn the page to skadoosh, a big splash page of a monster grabbing him and getting ready to kill him. That's what I mean. You want to have those big surprise pages. You want to have those uneven pages like your splash pages and things like that, because you want the reader to turn into that. And once they turn into that, they're like, whoa, because it's a big, it's a big art page. And a big plot point or something like that is cool to have there. Well, guys, that was the idea and the thumbnails for the video. That's step 0 and step 1. The next video will be on the pencils of the page. I'll show you how I lay out and compose my pages there as well with just the pencils. So I hope you really enjoyed this video. There'll be more in this series, and I hope you check those out too, and I hope they help. Please let me know if they did, or if there's something I could have done to make them a little more helpful. But as usual, thank you guys so much for watching. I do really appreciate it, and keep on drawing on. You guys take care.